Welcome to the Lead at the Top of Your Game podcast, where we equipped you to more effectively lead your seat at any employer, business, or industry in which you choose to play. Each week, we help you sharpen your leadership acumen by cracking open the playbooks of dynamic leaders who are doing big things in their professional endeavors. And now your host, leadership tactics and organizational development expert, Karen Farrell Rhodes.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast, and thanks for joining another episode designed to help you better lead at the top of your game. Now, as you know, for season 3, each month we're featuring leaders who have fascinating roles in a particular profession or industry. And today's episode is part of our special series featuring leaders who focus on an aspect of professional development. And now, enjoy the show. Hey there, superstars. This is Karen, and welcome to another episode of the Lead at the Top of Your Game podcast. I am so pleased to have on today's show Miss Denise Cooper, who's the founder and CEO of Remarkable Leadership Lessons. Remarkable Leadership Lessons is a company that she founded to assist leaders of all levels. She works with leaders of all levels to make sure that they're raising their game as major contributors in their business or industry. She's also a very renowned executive coach who's very highly sought after for her ability to assist leaders in preparing for their next best career option. Many of the people she coaches are on succession slates for roles of broader scope and responsibility. So helping them to close any development gaps and get ready for that next great role, she is an expert and specialist on that type of preparation. She's also the author and host of both a book and a podcast, respectively, also called Remarkable Leadership Lessons. So welcome to the show, Denise.
Hello, Karen, and hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, we're just absolutely thrilled that you have come aboard. And listeners, in full disclosure, I was very honored to be a guest on Denise's show. And we had so much fun and we're sharing so many ideas and tips together. And we ran out of time and we said we need to do this about 15 more times together. And so our next engagement, of course, I had to invite her on the show so that you could experience some of that magic that I was so fortunate to have experienced myself. So thanks again, Denise, for the gift of your time.
Hey, not a problem. I'll talk to anybody about leadership because I think it's one of the topics that there's a lot of top line and quotes and sayings. But when it really comes down to the nitty gritty of what skills do I need to do, what's the behaviors I need to have, and how do I execute against it,
Yeah.
gets a little thin on the level there.
It definitely does. We definitely agree there. Well, before we dive deep, Denise, I'd love the audience members to know just a tad bit about you personally. So, for as much as you feel comfortable, would you mind giving us a sneak peek into your personal life or passions?
Oh, I thought about this question because you get asked that regularly
Right.
on it. And I think the thing that surprises people the most is I'm a amateur farmer. Just
Ah,
every year I have my food growing in the backyard. And this year, instead of going in the ground, because here in North Carolina where I live, we have a lot of clay, I did something called container gardens. And I have to tell you, I doubled my production.
okay. So you and I are sisters from other mothers because I have the same. I have 8 container gardens out back.
Right.
And I, farm organically
Yes.
in the back, yes. So, that's
Yes.
another commonality we have.
Yes. Yes. And I love the container
Aren't
garden,
they
and I love
wonderful?
yeah, and I love gardening because it's so much in a strange way, it's just like growing a leader
It is.
and helping a leader grow. You think you're gonna get this,
Yeah.
and when it matures, that
What
plant matures, it's like, "Oh, wait a minute. It what?"
we got to see them from little seedlings, and we watched them
Yes.
grow and blossom, and produce and wow everybody. I mean, we saw their maturity in a couple months,
Yeah,
and what a rewarding feeling is that, right?
absolutely, absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's probably the thing that people will go, "You in dirt?"
Hey, you say, "You don't know that much. I'm a mystery. I have all kinds of fantastic, secrets and dimensions of myself."
That's it. That's it. That's it. And always exploring new ones.
Always exploring new ones. I love it. Well, thanks for sharing that, Denise. And let's switch a bit and let's talk a bit more about kind of leadership in general. And specifically, I'd love to focus on some of the stories and lessons that you wrote about in your book. But there
Mhm.
was one statement that I really resonated with, and I'd love to start us out there. And it was the
Okay.
statement that you said that being a leader is dangerous and it
Oh,
requires being on the line for something that you believe. And
yeah.
whether it's to change the future or to walk in faith or to stand for unpopular values, all of those are dimensions of leadership. So I'd love for you to share, expound on that a bit on why being a leader is dangerous, but can be still very rewarding.
Oh, it
Yeah.
is. It being a leader, if that's what you want to do, and I challenge people all the time that you may not have the title of leader, but you are a leader.
Always.
And the skills that you have to and use and learn and grow with to be someone who is the leader in an organization are very much the same kinds of skills that you need to have a really successful and good life. But it is also very dangerous when you have that title of leader because when you look inside, you see yourself as I'm just Denise.
Mm,
But because you have this title on you and this assumed power, people think differently about you.
yeah.
The other thing is that there isn't a leader who is in an organization who really isn't a change agent. I'll tell it from a story. I have one young lady who's one of my um, clients. She's a vice president, and she defined herself when I first met her as I'm a rebel rouser. I'm a change agent. I love to see things get better and better and better and better.
Uh-huh.
And so as we went through the learning of how to be a good change agent and to be a leader who can inspire others and come up with those things, she realized that being the first is pretty heartbreaking and it's hard
Mm,
to be vulnerable, to take all the slings and arrows of why are you making us change? What does that look like? You don't know us.
right.
When to do that kind of stuff. That's not what we do here.
Right.
Her boss always pushing back on, well, wait a minute, why do we have to do this? Or why do we have to do that? And then making people having the idea that you have to make people change their agenda to fit your agenda.
Right.
I mean, that's the essence of a leader, right?
Right.
A lot of it was people who saw her either in power or saw her as a leader and they wanted to help trip her up,
Mm,
or those who said, you know what, the boss right now is really pissed at you because he doesn't like what you're doing and where you're taking us. And they would just move back like the parting of the Red Seas and leave her out on it. And I'm not saying it just because she happened to be a woman, because I've also coached men on the same way.
mhm.
And it's that whole idea of, we think of being a leader is that we just have this great story that turns people minds and hearts and they just go, yes, of course, of course. But if you really study leadership and if you really study what it takes to make an organization sustainable and sustainably profitable, it means you have to change. It has to grow. It has to go into new markets. There's always things that are new that have to happen. And sometimes you're caught with an organization that missed that curve and didn't read the market right. And so now you're trying to dig out of a hole. Well, to be effective and to get an effective company, you've got to be able to help people change their behavior so that they can meet the new challenges. And what's that old saying of, I like change as long as you ain't imposing it on me?
That's right. Yours is right. As long as you're not imposing on it, I'm okay with change. It always baffles me, Denise, that I don't think there's a person on this earth that wouldn't agree that leadership is extremely important in almost every aspects of our lives,
Mhm,
but it's still so hard, and we're still exhibiting behaviors in the workplace that, in essence, sabotage
mhm.
when leaders are trying to. I wonder why that is. And I don't know if you have an answer, or I don't know the right answer myself, but I just wonder why leadership is so hard. There's so many forces that you're having to push against.
And I think, just by defining it, that it's not hard, but it is a different skill set that we're not always taught.
Mm,
There's still, when you talk to people and ask them, where did you learn leadership? And I do this as part of my classes sometimes.
mhm,
I'll say, who is the person who taught you how to lead? They'll say things like moms, dads, a teacher,
mhm.
great uncle, someone like that, or maybe there was a mentor in their life.
Yeah,
Well, that is role modeling values and beliefs,
that's right.
but it's not really understanding and learning how to do the hard skills and the communication and behavior skills and putting them together, come up with a way in which people will actually follow you or at least do what you ask them to do.
Mm.
And I think that's the reason why it's hard. And in particular, over my tenure, and I only admit to 30 years at this, okay?
Only 30.
Yeah, after that, it's really irrelevant.
Right.
What I've actually seen is a breakdown of companies really growing their leaders. Everybody's going after the send them to a class and then, sprinkle some gooby dust on them.
And hope
And then,
you're a leader at that point.
exactly. And leadership is a process. And so it has to be guided like anything else. And I think the fact that we don't have good guides for people, we often struggle with goal setting. I mean, what, in 30 years, we haven't changed the statistic on the failure of strategies. It's
Yeah.
still in the 80, 90%.
Yeah.
And it's because we teach people how to plan, which is really problem solving,
Yeah.
but we really don't focus on critical thinking, which is that strategic thinking about what problems are we trying to solve? What value are we trying to create and for whom?
That's
And
right.
that's at the big level. But even if you're a supervisor, you still have to come up with the what problems are we here to solve? When it's done right, what does done look like?
Right.
What are the things that get in the way, and what's the path forward? So there's a strategic thinking, strategic planning, and then strategic implementation. And in general, we're bad on planning or on thinking and on implementation.
That's
How
right.
many of those big strategic meetings we all had, and then 30 days later, the book is on the shelf and we're going in a different
That's
direction?
right.
If we break it down, a leader has to do four things right. They have to tell us where we're going. They have to make sure we have the resources, which is time, attention, and money. Then they need to follow up and ensure follow through so that the follow through is actually what we said we were going to do.
That's right.
And too often what happens is that most people have shiny bubble syndrome. New idea
How do
comes
you
along.
so define shiny bubble syndrome?
It's when, you're working every day and the tyranny of the day moves you,
Mm,
that to-do list
yes.
moves you off, or some new thing breaks on the news and we just have to, oh my God, we need that. So what's the new thing now? AI.
AI, yes. Everywhere you look around, AI
They're
workshops,
creating,
books.
how do we do this?
Mhm.
How do we Well, that's great, and you should be understanding how the market is changing,
Right.
okay, or how technology is changing, how customer preferences are changing.
Mm,
Absolutely. But taking them in a vacuum, away from what your strategic thinking said was the initial problem that you're trying to solve, the initial value that you're trying to generate for your customers, what happens is you begin to diverge and allow the idea as it's forming to not have an anchor.
mhm.
And then going back and saying, well, if we go this way, what does that do to our current plans, resources, outcomes? And then what does it do to our implementation plan?
That's right.
And so bringing it back and constantly doing it. And so what I do instead is I ask leaders to really say, okay, what is the, 18 months, because that's about as far as we can think out
Yeah.
and be good.
Right.
But then every 3 months, revisit goals, revisit to make sure that we're still convinced that this is where we want to be. There's nothing that's going to intervene with us. And if you plan for goals to be somewhere around 12 to 90 days to 12 months, you allow the organization to stay focused immediately on solving the most critical problems,
Right.
but you also give your organization the breath to rethink through
Mm.
what they're going to do. How many companies right now, it'd be interesting, have your viewers send you a text message or a comment on here.
Yeah.
How many of us are still waiting till fourth quarter to check in on our goals?
A lot, I would guess, if they're honest with
Yeah,
themselves,
yeah,
you know?
yeah. And I will also say the other thing is the shiny bubble is when you read things like Harvard Business Review and Forbes and all these grand magazines and articles, they're telling you the truth, but for the top 100,
Yes,
there are millions upon multi-millions of
that's
companies.
right.
And the gap between the top, I'll say even Fortune 500 and the rest of them is bigger than the Grand Canyon. And so you're not starting in the same place with skills, technology, money, none of those things. And so reading those articles can give you a false premise that if you do these 5 things, it's going to work.
Right.
And in your environment,
It
that
may
may
not
not be.
work at
Yeah.
all. You're so right on that. I've been also wondering if companies and organizations aren't doing a great job on teaching followership.
Yeah.
Meaning, everybody can't all well, you can lead in your role no matter your level, but there's sometimes when you're gonna be the leader and sometimes when you're gonna be the follower. And the follower is also extremely important because it has a very key role. It's a key stakeholder in getting, X initiative or X effort done, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
But sometimes I've noticed, especially when I'm observing and coaching clients and watching and observing in a group setting, sometimes individuals don't do a good job in being a great follower. How do you contribute and help support the leader? What kind of ground rules can you all come up with together to make sure everybody is being heard or collaborating with in the way that they like to collaborate? I'm just curious of your thoughts on followership. Do you think companies are doing a great job on that, or is there some room to improve in that area?
Yeah, and I think part of the problem is the language, right?
Good.
Followership. We have this idea or this feeling, at least in the US, that followership is really being less than
Yeah.
the leader,
Spot on.
and no one wants to feel like they're less than. And so we have a role that is a leader, which basically says this person has the responsibility to make primarily the decisions on where we're going to go. Everybody else is an influencer, and even a leader has to influence up that, if you're the CEO, you still got to influence the board. The board has to influence the CEO.
That's right.
They all have to influence investors so that everybody has a boss in this. So this is not just a kind of a, middle management issue that we're talking about. And the influence that if you have the role and the title of being a leader is one thing, which means you have to do those 4 things right.
Mhm. That's
What
right.
where we're headed, what does it look like when we get there, manage the resources, follow up, and ensure follow through.
Mhm.
But if I'm the project leader, I'm influencing those things. And some of the skills that as you use as a leader, which is really around communication, understanding your audience, those kinds of things are the same skills that an influencer has to use. Every time, if you're the tech person who is just doing the coding, you've got to influence people to believe that the coding that you do is the right thing.
Right.
If you're a nurse in a hospital, then you've got to influence the doctor, influence the patient so that they both understand and that they're following the orders that are gonna get them healthy.
Mm.
And so in my work, if I help people understand when they're leading versus influencing,
Mm.
it gives them a language and a skill base to start from. And so then when I go over the assessments that I use with them, they understand what helps them influence better or what inhibits them, how their mindset oftentimes prevents them from either being a good leader or a good influencer. And the last piece is it also helps them understand what are they passionate about
Right.
and how does their passions and the things that they don't really like to do influence how they lead and or influence other people, motivate them, inspire them to stay focused on things. Oftentimes I find my clients complain about I'm a procrastinator or I'm a perfectionist. And when we start peeling back the onion,
Mhm.
that's not really what they are.
Mhm. Mhm.
What it is they're caught in a loop of this is what I really, really like to do. And I want it to be perfect.
That's right.
And so they spend more time on that, avoiding the things that they don't really like or
Yeah.
see value in.
That's right.
And so
Yeah,
by
but
helping
may
them
still be
see
critical in executing,
exactly,
right?
exactly. And sometimes it means they have to have a conversation with the person who's their boss
Yeah.
and say, "Why is this important?" Or "Why did you assign this to me?"
Mm.
And so it's this dynamic of having the conversation and really understanding the context. And the fact that leaders don't do well in the setting the vision piece, because it's not always about the big vision. It really is about, are you clear about what good performance is
Oh,
and why?
preach, yes,
And why?
and why. That's right. And I'm curious, Denise, because you coach so many, clients in both individually and working with organizations. Are there any trends that you're seeing that leaders are struggling with right now? I know you talked about the vision, but are there other areas, post-pandemic that, leaders are commonly struggling with right now that you're having to help them work through?
I think it kind of depends, but ultimately it really does focus around this goal setting idea
Mm,
and setting objectives. I think the majority of people really, really struggle with leaders in particular, really struggle with what does it look like when it's done right? And what is the outcome that I'm actually having on it? And because once you get the goal set, then you have to provide feedback and opportunity for people to you have to let them go
right? Yeah.
and do it their way
Yeah.
because you don't really wanna watch what they're doing as much as you wanna judge what they've done, how it came apart.
Right.
And I think, we still have this penchant of, if I can't see you, then I can't evaluate you.
That's right.
And so this idea of evaluating your work is a very difficult one. And I think the reason it makes it difficult is it requires that you have to have a conversation with a person.
That's right. That's right.
And it's easier to have to stay focused on tasks, to be in meetings, which are notoriously bad.
Yeah.
They go too long, you walk out, and if there's 6 people in there, you got 6 people saying what happened,
That
and they generally don't come in the same.
not at all. Not at
And so
all.
it's all this idea of how do we manage goals and the work is really gotten more difficult. And I think the last piece of it is the pandemic caused people to really reassess who they are and what they're doing. And they're struggling now in general. I think people in general are struggling with redefining their boundaries and their values. And when I say redescribing their reassessing their values, I'm not saying that, you might say that I'm a kind-hearted person. Okay, that may not have changed. I wanna be a kind-hearted person. I wanna be someone who's fair. I wanna be somebody who has integrity. But how that gets expressed
It's
definitely
different.
changes.
Yes.
So, it's easy for me, and I've learned a lot about how to be kind to you face to face. But how do I be kind to you when we're virtual?
That's right. And we don't have as many physical connections as
Yeah.
we had in the past, where there was a bit more, I'll say, grace, if you will.
Mhm.
When a meeting might not have gone well, but you might go to coffee afterwards and talk it through or get a better understanding. But sometimes you're not able to do that as
Yes.
easily, these
Yeah.
days. And I love what you said about goal setting, and I'm going to push it a little further. I think they're struggling with goal setting both ways,
Mhm.
both getting goals from their higher ups, kind of coming to agreement on
Mhm.
what needs to be done.
Mhm.
And then as they get their marching orders, setting the right goals for their teams
Yes.
to get that done. Because, I
Yes.
have seen, I don't know if you have, but I've seen a bit of, I'm just going to make this up, but say the CEO gave the marketing director a goal,
Mhm.
and the marketing director heard it, but really wanted to do something just a little bit different, like a different spin. And then they tell their marketing teams, this is where we're going to do. This is what our goal should be, and this is your role into it. And sometimes there's a disconnect
Yeah.
as it comes from the down from the top, and then feedback comes back up to the, through the chain. And sometimes there's a disconnect when it's kind of that thing when you tell a story, you whisper in somebody's ear and you better the next person. It
That's
just
exactly right.
changes a little, and by 10 people later, the story has gotten totally different. I'm seeing an issue with clear communication, both up and
Absolutely.
down the leadership chain. So,
And for me, that's teaching people how to have shared understanding. So
that's
what
right.
is it that we're talking about?
That's right.
Shared meaning. When we say it's blue, what shade of blue are we talking about?
That's right.
Right? And then shared expectations. Things like, when do you think you're going to get it back to me? What will it look like when it comes back to me? What's the use of it?
That
How is it going to be connected into the organization? And so I know what it's going to do,
that's right.
so that when I'm delivering it, I know it does what its purpose is
Mm.
in doing it. And I think those kinds of conversations don't generally happen. And if they do, people think that I can have that conversation once
And it'll be
and then I'm
fine.
done with it.
Yep. You gotta
And
reinforce it.
communication, that's exactly
Mm.
right. Communication is a series of planned conversations that keep people on target and bring out the beauty. It's kind of like we were talking about growing a flower
Yeah.
or growing food. Yes, we think if we add water and we add fertilizer, but sometimes during that time frame, we've got to go back and connect in because now we need to put up a trellis because
Right.
we thought it was going to be able to withstand the weight of the fruit, but it didn't.
It
So now we've got to adjust it because what we want is to grow up.
That's right.
Sometimes we want more leaves because we need the shade on the fruit to
That's
keep it
right.
from getting burnt.
That's right.
But then too many leaves come up. So
And it takes
then you've got
away,
to
you have
figure
to
out,
prune
is
them
that
out.
right? You got to prune it. But the process of communication is often the same as growing something because it's not a one and done. The attention of the brain, and I'm a geek, and most of my work is around neuroscience and really the neuroscience of how people learn and behave and then evaluate their own personal results. That's a big core part of my leadership. Because when you can understand how you evaluate yourself, it makes it easier to understand and ask questions about how others evaluate themselves and the work and the contributions that they're bringing. But in all of that, it's this need to have a beginning, middle, and end. And the end is I had this one conversation, and then I don't need another conversation with you until you're done.
Right.
And I think that art, because we don't manage resources well, we to put too many projects on the table,
Yes, we
too
do.
little money,
Boy, is that not something that's
yeah,
replayed day
well,
after
yeah,
day after
well,
day.
yeah, well, yeah, and
Yeah.
we want it faster and faster and faster and faster and faster.
That's right. Oh, that is so wow. And and I reflect on this conversation, Denise, and now it makes total sense why you selected the leadership tactic in my book that you did. As our listeners know, we always love to ask our guests
Mhm.
which of the tactics and the leadership tactics in the book that came out of the research really resonated with them. And you were so kind enough to share that leading with strategic decision making
Absolutely.
really resonated with you. And for my new listeners out there, leading with strategic decision making is just what it is. It sounds like it's either making a good decision yourself, having that process to self guide yourself and making good decisions, or leading a good decision making process with your team and stakeholders. And
Mhm.
so, can you share with us, Denise, why that one really jumped out at you?
I think, particularly for leaders, this idea, when people normally read strategic decision making, they may come up with thinking about the product, the service, or what I do.
Mm,
But it really, for me and my clients, it's really understanding, when do you lean in to change behavior, to accelerate
mm,
change, to give people breath out of it. And, there's one story in that I love telling everybody in my book, Remarkable Leadership Lessons, Change Results One Conversation at a Time. And that is, there was a supervisor, Aiden, he was a VP, who was working with someone who, we play the pass around game. We don't want to get rid of the employee, but we're going to give it to the new guy.
yeah. Let's go with
Aiden
it.
was the new guy.
Oh,
But the short of the story is that as he got to know this particular person, he realized that this person had been poorly mentored and poorly trained. And that what the organization had done was create this way in which they had decided this person had no value and they would just lie to her. So when she asked for deadlines, she was the head of the project. Everybody would sit there nodding their head, saying, "Oh, yeah, I'll get it to you. I'll get it to you." And then they wouldn't. They come up with an excuse. So her targets got pushed further and further. And consequently, her performance was being judged as not being a good leader, not being a good performer.
Right.
But everyone colluded to make her fail.
Mm-hmm.
And for the strategic decision making part, he had to decide, was he going to live his values,
Mm-hmm.
which was to create a fair workplace and protect and intervene for his people? Or was he just going to go with the quote HR thing of this is her last chance? And really, if you just write her up as not being able to do it, then we can fire her. And he made the decision that he wasn't going to let that happen without a fight.
Nice.
And so he had to go to all the supervisors of all the VP, his peers, and say, "Look, you may not like her, you may not like her style, but lying in the meeting is not acceptable.
Good for him.
And we need to make a way in which when they give their word they're going to do something, they're going to test this module,
That's right.
that they tested or you're on their back as having that telling them that they violated a rule
Mm,
or boundary or a value of this company."
that's right. That's right.
And so that to me is the strategic decision making that too often people just don't do.
They don't do. And you know what? I would be remiss if I didn't add to it. It's also a perfect example of leading with courageous agility,
Yeah.
which is all about having the fortitude and the courage to stand up for what you believe in, even if you're unsure, and do what's right, even if you're unsure of the end result. So he did that. He wasn't sure if the team would be happy with him or not, but he had the courage to make the right decision, as you've mentioned, in strategic decision making, but then also having the courageous agility to act in the way that
Mhm.
was in alignment with his values, even if he was unsure what was going to happen in the end.
Yeah,
What
and
a
being
great
the
story.
yeah, yeah, and being the new person,
Mhm.
you're always testing to see if people are going to accept you.
Always. Oh,
So it was really a courageous
it
act
was.
to say, these folks don't really know me.
Yeah.
And I'm going to set my boundaries and my values, and I'm going to wear them on my sleeve.
That is a fantastic story. Well, we just need to drop the mic there, Denise, because there have been so many gems that you have been kind enough to share in this episode. But before we close out, listeners will definitely have all the information in the show notes on how to learn more about Denise, how to get her book, how to listen to her podcast, all those goodies. But I do, Denise, always love to give our guests time to give voice to where to find them as well. So will you please share how listeners can get in touch with you?
The fastest way is just to look me up on LinkedIn, Denise Cooper. And it's, LinkedIn/IN/Denise Cooper, and that will pull it up there.
Like,
But the other is just go to my website. There's a contact page on the website that's, remarkable what is it? RLlessons.com. And there's a contact page. You can reach out there.
wonderful. Fantastic. Well, thank you again for coming aboard and joining this episode of the podcast. This is our second time together. I think we have at least 13 more to go. And then,
Oh, nice to know hearing
yes. But this has been fantastic. Thank you again for the gift of your time, Denise.
Thank you so much. And thank you, your listeners. And, this is such a special thing. And I feel so honored that you stopped by and decided to listen in on this conversation.
Absolutely. And listeners, as I always say, thank you for the gift of your time as well, because there are many podcasts out there, and we're very honored to have you as well. Please be sure to share with a friend, and because that's the way that we expand our reach to help others just like you to lead at the top of your game. Thanks again, and see you next week. And that's our show for today. Thank you for listening to the Lead at the Top of Your Game podcast, where we help you lead your seat at any employer, business, or industry in which you choose to play. You can check out the show notes, additional episodes, bonus resources, and also submit guest recommendations on our website at leadyourgamepodcast.com. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn.
by searching for the name Karen Rhodes, with Karen being spelled Karan. And if you like the show, the greatest gift you can give would be to subscribe and leave a rating on your podcast platform of choice. This podcast has been a production of Shockingly Different Leadership, a global consultancy which helps organizations execute their people, talent development, and organizational effectiveness initiatives on an on-demand project or contract basis. Huge thanks to our production and editing team for a job well done. Goodbye for now.